We are going to dig deeper today in the South America weather and the crops over there, and also the US export sales and its impact on the commodity markets. Right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So, Jerry, let's start with South America first. We have some rains reported down there that makes us think that the crop will not be as bad. But the USDA attaché in Brazil has recognized this week that the soybean crop at least will go lower.
Yes, yeah. Well, the USDA and to some extent, some of the South American official ConAb and some of those people are still in that 160-61 level type of number. It turns up that the attaché took that number down to 160, no, 158 and a half on that number. I think it was on Wednesday of this week. From there, after really, the interesting thing, or I should, the important thing, let's say the important at this point, was that South American rains were forecasted to be have a good potential. And it turns out most of the rains hit on Saturday night into Sunday, and there was some very good amounts in Argentina. They didn't really get all of Cordoba and northern parts of Santa Fe, but still very good. And then the really important factor was that there was some good rains across Mato Grosso, Goiás, on into the northeast there, parts of Minas Gerais, and there was 1 to 4 inch potential there. That's the best rain they've had in probably 2 months in that part of the world. So that definitely set a negative tone for us for this week. From there. There was a little bit of crawlback maybe midweek, but from there, there was some light showers continuing around in the northern parts of Brazil. Doesn't look like there's going to be a lot this weekend, but the market was still defensive today here because we had really kind of a defensive weekly exports. Not totally surprising this time of year between Christmas and years. They were definitely even lower than low side of the expectations and the ranges in that on corn, beans, and wheat. But to some extent, the market had already fell on Thursday with the rains that we have had. Right now, at least, there is some rains out in the forecast for next week down in that part of the world. I guess the real important factor in this whole thing is how much has already been damaged and hurt down there, and how that's going to turn around here as we go forward
Yeah, the
uh,
major
on this thing.
concern that I've heard from boots on the ground there from the Brazilian farmers in the states, several states like Goiás or Mato Grosso, are the delays, the several delays.
Ooh, totally. I think that's something that hasn't totally come to this market's attention. I think you're exactly right. They sense the situation down there because of the delays we've had. And yeah, we've got maybe we're going to finish up with some pretty respectable soybean plantings down there, but we're pushing it so late that and also the maturity of this crop is not been sped up all that much. Maybe it has in certain spots up down there, and we really need to get harvest rolling here in a big way here January 15th. And many times we've had maybe 10 or 15% already going. And there's been some early reports down there, but it hasn't been the case. Now, why do we get shook up about that? Well, the key thing is that if it gets to a certain point where even the producers down there are not going to invest in planting corn, there's been a lot of talk of even people now considering to use cotton, and it has a crop that definitely doesn't need as much rain at the end of the season because that's the real key feature here is in the corn side situation. If we're going to be planting corn and northern Mato Grosso in mid-March or after, that is a danger point at this point. All of a sudden, some certain years we have rain that might go along out there to mid-May, but most of the time we're already drying up in mid to late April, and that's not enough time to get the crop developed and pollinated and things like that. So all of a sudden, there's a lot of people are going to say that's not what I'm going to do. I'm not going to invest my money and plant a crop that, you know, maybe not even get half a crop. They don't have the bigger yields that we have in the U.S., but even then, they're nobody likes to all of a sudden plant a crop expecting 150, or let's say 100 to 150 bushels, and all of a sudden they get 25 to 75 bushels. That's no fun, from there. So that's the one twist of this thing is really going to come along here as we go forward uh, on the
Now,
South American situation.
yeah. Now, what maybe has dumped the market at the end of this week was the U.S. export sales numbers, right?
Oh yes, yes, yeah. As I mentioned, kind of passing over earlier here, export sales. We were only 14.5 million on corn, 7.5 million or so, or eight on beans, and what was it, 4.5 to 4.8 million on wheat. Those are disappointing. There's no doubt about it. Even during a kind of tough week here. They had some pretty decent pushes on stuff before Christmas, but a lot of times at this time of year, I think there's right now at least the exporting firms probably decided that this would be a good time to give some vacation to their dock workers and their port facility operators and that. And I think that's part of what happened here. But that added into the negativism today. But the other thing that we've got is next Friday we're going to end up having a big set of information here from the USDA.
Yes, and regarding the wheat war, just not to skip wheat, we have read that India is expected to grow a record crop.
Yeah, their wheat crop it they came out with 114 million metric ton crop for wheat, and considering that they had kind of a shaky monsoon period, and that even I haven't really heard a number on soybeans, but even the soybeans that that they tended to like to plant early in this summer period this last year was also a little erratic, but there has been a little better fall planting period for uh, India weather at this point, or Indian wheat, I should say, and that. So that is an interesting twist here that come along with the wheat side of things. Uh, Surprisingly, the wheat market has found a little bit of a balance here, and that we've had some issues and some demand issues about crop sizes other places than India, and also we've had some export tenders here over the last 2 or 3 weeks have been pretty sizable, and I think there's also a kind of creeping concern here that the U.S. plantings could on winter wheat could be down anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5 million to 1.5 to 2.5 million acres this year, and to some extent the weather's part of that case in the out in the plains. But I think the key feature has been the fact that wheat prices have been very disappointing here since last spring and been on the defensive because the fact that the Black Sea output this year was again at near 90 million for Russia, and Ukraine was pretty solid. The U.S. didn't turn out to be as negative as anticipated here because of the weather we'd had up through uh, May of last year. There was some decent rains that came through and kind of saved and popped up the U.S. Final productions, maybe uh, on the output there. And then the Canadian crop, which is also looking kind of ugly. Earlier in the summer did get enough moisture to kind of come through. And then this last fall, the Argentine crop, which is the big southern production scenario, along with India, had the crops in Argentina definitely need a break after the ugly conditions they had last year. So they're coming back. The key thing in this thing is, I think, is going to be what we see with those acreage numbers next week on the 17th. And wheat is probably going to be the one that people are going to watch here on for that market going forward.
From those numbers that you brought last week, are you rectifying anything?
No, on the corn and soybean production U.S., I kind of feel like that I'm still kind of feeling comfortable with the numbers that I anticipated here because of some late season dryness and things like that. Looking for about 31 million down on U.S. Soybean numbers and around 70 million down on corn. The interesting twist on it is, I think that the seeding levels on beans might be a little less, while corn could be up a little bit on things as we go forward. The biggie on these things that's also going to be discussed on this a week from tonight, and that is the fact that U.S. corn and soybeans have their December stocks report, which is a good measure to see how this expectations on demand is going to go for both of them at this point. From there, the soybeans is going to be probably the one that's going to be watched the closest at this point. We've had some very good uh, uh, demand levels this fall on U.S. crush. That night data came out for November here earlier this week, and it totaled up for the whole quarter to a record level for any quarter in the U.S. at 577 million worth of U.S. soybeans that were processed. Now, yeah, very impressive. Part of that's because of the fact that we've had this ongoing demand on the West Coast for renewable diesel, so that's part of it. And on the soybean meal side of things, because of the uh, poultry numbers staying somewhat static from last year, and the soybean usage in pork is kind of twisted at this point. We had kind of a slowdown on numbers here back in the spring and summer on pork numbers, but the, this last fall, the excuse me, the U.S. Pigs per litter size moved up about went from like 11.2 up to about 11.6 uh, pigs per litter. That just compensated for the fact that we had 3% less breeding animal, but we actually had more young big baby pigs. So I think that's another feature that you tend to have a higher protein value in pork when early in the season or early in their growth cycle. So that's another feature there. Overall, that's interestingly enough, when we get to those our data next Friday here about the quarterly stocks, the exports this fall definitely were down because of the strong competition out of Brazil here, who was super aggressive on moving their pretty sizable crop for last year from there. But the twist of it is that we had a smaller crop because of the fact that we didn't actually plant enough at this point. Actually, our crop size, as I mentioned, was going to be down somewhere around 31 million and that. And so the prospects here of our residual, along with the our residual may be slipping a little bit, but our ending carryover stocks on beans, I'm kind of looking for them to be down somewhere around 60, 65 million from last year. and it's just a slight, less than 10 million above 3 years ago stocks levels and that. So there's a possibility that the USDA's numbers next Friday could show the U.S. exports, excuse me, the U.S. demand side stuff, along with a smaller crop that we're anticipating, could actually take our carryover stock from 245 down to possibly the 215 level. And it might be lower than that if it turns up that the crop size is a little lower or demands are a little higher. One of the classics in soybean price activity is if you're above 200 million carryover stock, things are kind of hanging in there and that, but you get under 200 million and people get a lot more nervous. And so that could create an interesting short covering in the beans next week if that occurs. So that's going to be one of the areas that people are going to watch very closely. Corn has some numbers on the things also for next week. But the biggest problem with the corn this year is the fact that the huge jump of 9% more plantings and the overall, even with a yield that's below trend this year, we're still going to produce a crop that's like 1.4 billion bushels higher than a year ago. And even if we have expanded demand, which we have that because prices are cheaper, and that suggests that like in exports, we're anticipating to be up about 70 million on that one. And also ethanol, we mentioned this kind of popping along in here earlier that it's been a real positive here. And we're actually, this year's numbers on output, they're still going to be up there close to 1.7 billion bushels for the quarter when you include all the different industrial demands and stuff like that. And so that's that's kind of the high levels we had back in 2022 and back in 2019. So very positive situation there. But the feed demand numbers are going to be kind of interesting here because last year they took quite a tumble, high prices and reduced numbers here in the U.S. livestock data and that. But it looks like we're going to bounce back this year about 103 million bushels, primarily because the cattle feed yards have expanded their numbers by over a million head here this fall. Basically, the grazing conditions and things of that nature finally started to get wore out a little bit here because of the dryness that was occurring. Really, mostly Nebraska, northern areas up to Montana, things like that. Even Texas was in the best of shape. Kansas definitely was there. Oklahoma was kind of a mixed bag there. They had some decent, grazing opportunities, but in general, it was time to move some of those animals off the uh, grazing land and into feed yards, and boy, that really turned that number around. So we've got some good demand out there in front of us. Unfortunately, because of this big jump that we've had in this year's corn output, even with let's say a 174 bushel yield, that's down 9/10 of a bushel from what it was back in November, is my expectations. But even with the slightly reduced yield, it's still the 174. We haven't been able to get above 176 and a half for 7 or 8 years here. And so it's going to be quite interesting if we're going to see the USDA stay with their longer term trends of over 180 to 181 bushels for next year at this point. But in general, we got a 236 million increase in corn, yet our carryover stock is going to be at on 12 billion bushels. out there, and that's 11% higher than a year ago. So it's been a tough sledding for corn. I kind of feel like there's still going to be some erraticness because of the conditions and the problems down in Brazil. But right now, it's not staring us in the face, so the market has not really responded to it on a worldwide basis at this point. And to some extent, that issues it's going to be interesting. We had just a huge crop of corn last year in Brazil, and it really put the Brazilian transportation system under huge strains, and we had corn sitting all over the place, and basis levels were, just trashed out there. That's part of the reason why we've lost some of our corn exports because, but that was a crop that was looking to be like 130 million metric tons. And that's where the USDA and even the Brazilians were at earlier this year. But a lot of people are anticipating that number to be a lot closer to 120 or maybe even down to 115 when we get further along. And it depends so much on how many producers out there want to go ahead and take a shot at planting the corn, because despite the fact that we've had such a slow developing soybean crop and plantings there that's really putting things in quite a strain when you look at it longer term. But wow, we got a lot of moving parts looking at us, and next week's going to hopefully get some of it settled at this point. And that I kind of feel like that there's some kind of issues in the world right now between the South American output, weather going on in various parts of the world. And God, we didn't even have a chance to discuss what's going on in the Black Sea or what's going on in the Mid East. All those issues are still out there, and that. So I think there's maybe some steadying forces going on here, and this coming weekend. We'll have to see what all the numbers are from the USDA next Friday.
Yeah, we will have to tune in next week and discuss that again.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, we've set everybody up for some ideas of what we're going to see and that, and then now we'll see if uh, my analysis or our ideas about what's going to happen does happen or not. I really does think that there's still a lot of uncertainty in South America's output and how much, we're starting to show some demand coming back to the U.S. primarily because the prices have had significant declines here in both corn and soybeans from there. Wheat's already was kind of beat up last spring, but at this point, the cash prices here, I think there's getting more attraction around the world, and we'll see if the buyers continue to show up here over the next couple weeks here as we start to look at how the 2024 world productions are going to turn out.
All right, thank you very much.
Take care.